November 1943. 110,000 Japanese soldiers wait inside the most fortified position in the Pacific. Rabaul, 5 airfields, 367 anti-aircraft guns, hundreds of miles of tunnels carved into volcanic rock. A fortress that made D-Day look like a training exercise. American generals calculated the cost: 60,000 troops, 18,000 casualties, months of bloody fighting. Then someone asked a different question. What if we just don't attack it? What happened next changed warfare forever. This is the story of how America won its greatest victory by refusing to fight. When Japan captured Rabaul in February 1942, they didn't just take a base. They built a death trap. Simpson Harbor could anchor 100 ships, 5 airfields with concrete runways. But the real nightmare was underground. Japanese engineers spent 20 months carving an entire city into volcanic rock, underground barracks for 20,000 men, hospitals buried so deep no bomb could touch them, ammunition dumps holding tens of thousands of tons of explosives, command centers that could survive direct hits. By mid-1943, 110,000 troops were stationed there. It was the Pearl Harbor of the South Pacific, except this time the Japanese were ready. Brigadier General Kenneth thought he could bomb them into submission. January 5, 1943. Walker leads 12 bombers against Simpson Harbor at high noon. The Japanese were waiting, fighters from 3 airfields, anti-aircraft fire from every angle. Walker's B-17, the San Antonio Rose, is hit almost immediately. He pressed the attack anyway. 4 Japanese Zeros concentrated on his aircraft. Other crews watched it lose altitude, trailing smoke, heading for the water. Neither Walker nor his crew of 10 was ever found. He became the highest-ranking American officer still missing from World War II. The raid accomplished nothing. General George Kenney tried next, massive bombing raids in October and November 1943. October 12th, 349 aircraft, the largest strike ever assembled in the Pacific. The Japanese repaired the runways in 36 hours. November 2nd, 72 B-25s at low altitude. It became the bloodiest air battle of the war. 9 B-25s lost. 10 P-38s shot down. Major Raymond Wilkins led his squadron through the heaviest fire imaginable, destroyed 2 Japanese ships, then made one final strafing run to protect his men. He died on his 87th combat mission. The fortress stood. Every planner looking at Rabaul saw the same nightmare. Taking it would cost more American lives than any battle since the Civil War. Then someone thought, the unthinkable. June 1943. The Joint Strategic Survey Committee in Washington is analyzing the Rabaul problem. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, is looking at casualty projections. 60,000 assault troops, 18,000 killed and wounded in the first 2 weeks. And that's if everything goes right. He asks a simple question. What does capturing Rabaul actually accomplish? Everyone assumed you had to take enemy bases. That's how wars worked. You capture territory, you win. But Marshall saw it differently. Rabaul wasn't a strategic objective. It was just a base. If you could trap them there, cut off supplies, sink every ship, shoot down every plane trying to land, the fortress became a prison. 110,000 Japanese soldiers would be defeated without a single Marine hitting the beach. General George Kenney had been bombing Rabaul for months. He realized something crucial. You couldn't destroy Rabaul. It was too big, too dispersed, too deeply buried. But you didn't need to destroy it. You just needed to neutralize it. Build airfields within fighter range. Sweep over them daily. Crater their runways faster than they can repair them. Sink every supply ship. The garrison starves. The aircraft sit useless. The fortress becomes irrelevant. General Douglas MacArthur hated the idea. He'd spent 18 months planning to capture Rabaul. His entire strategy pointed toward it. His staff had maps covering the walls, landing beaches, phase lines, objectives. Bypassing it felt like retreat, like leaving the job unfinished. But Marshall presented the brutal math. Rabaul had no strategic value that justified any casualties at all. How many Marines is Rabaul worth? 20,000? 40,000? MacArthur had no answer. At the Quebec Conference, the combined chiefs of staff issued their directive. Rabaul would be neutralized by air and naval action, but not captured. Allied forces would seize islands nearby to build airfields. Those airfields would maintain constant pressure. The garrison would be left to wither. MacArthur read the order in his office overlooking Brisbane. His staff waited for his reaction. All those plans, all that preparation, obsolete. He sat silent for several minutes. Then he called in his chief of staff. "The objective is no longer Rabaul. The objective is the Philippines. We're bypassing it." Years later, MacArthur would claim in his memoirs that bypassing strongpoints had always been his strategy, that he'd pioneered the concept. The historical record shows otherwise. But he was smart enough to recognize when he'd lost an argument and pragmatic enough to turn it into victory. November 1st, 14,000 Marines land at Empress Augusta Bay on Bougainville, 250 miles from Rabaul. The Japanese try to interfere. They send a cruiser force from Truk. Admiral Halsey responds with carrier strikes on Rabaul itself. November 5th, Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman commands carriers Saratoga and Princeton. At dawn, he launches 97 aircraft. Everyone knew the risks. Rabaul had over 300 anti-aircraft guns, hundreds of fighters. But Halsey's orders were clear: hit them before they reach Bougainville. The strike package arrives over Simpson Harbor at first light, catches the Japanese cruiser force at anchor. 18 minutes. American dive bombers put bombs into 6 of 7 heavy cruisers. Pearl Harbor in reverse. Sherman lost 9 aircraft. The Japanese cruiser force was crippled. Naval historians called it the first successful carrier strike against a heavily defended land base. The Japanese Navy learned their lesson. Simpson Harbor wasn't safe. They withdrew all heavy ships. Without naval support, Rabaul couldn't contest anything. By December, Marines had built an airfield on Bougainville. American bombers immediately began hitting Rabaul daily. By January 1944, Rabaul was surrounded. Allied airfields on Bougainville, New Britain, the Green Islands, constant pressure from every direction. Fighters swept over daily. Any Japanese aircraft trying to take off was shot down. Bombers cratered runways every night. The Japanese could repair them, but couldn't use them. Simpson Harbor became a graveyard of sunken ships. Supply convoys stopped trying. 110,000 troops were cut off. Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka commanded the Southeast Area Fleet at Rabaul. He'd spent 2 years preparing for the decisive battle, building tunnels, positioning guns, training men. He'd prepared for American Marines storming the beaches. He'd prepared to fight to the last man. He'd never prepared for being ignored. At first, confusion. Why bypass such a strategic position? Then understanding. The Americans didn't need to capture Rabaul. They'd already defeated it. Without ships, Rabaul couldn't project power. Without aircraft, the airfields were useless. Without supplies, the garrison couldn't survive. Kusaka ordered troops to plant gardens, grow their own food, prepare for a siege that might last years. Everything after January 1944 was just waiting. Other American commanders watched what happened at Rabaul. Admiral Nimitz applied it to the Marshall Islands, bypassed heavily fortified Vocha, Maloelap, and Mili entirely. Captured lightly defended Kwajalein and Eniwetok instead. MacArthur used it in New Guinea, bypassed Japanese concentrations at Madang and Wewak, landed at Hollandia, hundreds of miles west. By March 1944, the bypass strategy had spread across the Pacific. Planners asked different questions. Can we go around it? Can we isolate it? Can we win without fighting here? The answer was increasingly yes. In the 12 months before the Rabaul bypass, Allied forces suffered over 15,000 casualties, capturing positions that provided minimal strategic value. In the 12 months after, casualties dropped below 8,000. Rate of advance more than doubled. For the Japanese, the psychological impact was devastating. For 2 years, their strategy relied on defending key positions. Hold islands, control sea lanes, make every American advance so costly they'd negotiate peace. The bypass destroyed that logic. It didn't matter how well you fortified a position if the enemy went around it. It didn't matter how many troops you concentrated if those troops couldn't move. By mid-1944, Japan had lost strategic mobility. They could defend positions they held, but couldn't counterattack, couldn't reinforce, couldn't evacuate. Americans controlled sea and air, which meant Americans controlled the pace and direction of the war. August 1945, Japan surrenders. Australian forces enter Rabaul in September. They find approximately 69,000 Japanese soldiers and 20,000 civilian workers still alive. Over 20,000 had died from starvation, disease, and malnutrition. The garrison had sustained itself by converting to agriculture, growing rice, sweet potatoes, tapioca in fields carved from jungle. They fished, raised chickens, rationed carefully. An Australian general at the surrender remarked, "Rabaul had become like a small independent country." Vice Admiral Kusaka returned to Japan, published his memoirs in 1958. Nothing new on the Rabaul front. In interviews before his death in 1972, Kusaka said the worst part wasn't the bombing or starvation. It was waiting for an enemy who never came. Waiting for reinforcements that never arrived, waiting for a battle that would give their sacrifice meaning. The battle never happened. General George Marshall returned to Washington after the war, served as Secretary of State, then Secretary of Defense, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1953 for the Marshall Plan. When historians asked about the Pacific War, Marshall said the decision to bypass Rabaul was one of the most important strategic choices of the conflict. He estimated it saved tens of thousands of American lives and shortened the war by months. He never claimed credit for himself. He said it was a collective decision by military professionals choosing the path that preserved lives while achieving objectives. General Kenneth Walker's body was never recovered. He remains the highest-ranking American officer never accounted for from World War II. Major Raymond Wilkins is buried at Manila American Cemetery. He died on his 87th combat mission protecting his men. There is no memorial honoring the thousands of Marines who didn't die because someone had the wisdom to choose not to invade. The bypass strategy was used at Truk, Wewak, Kavieng, and dozens of smaller Japanese bases. Historians estimate it saved over 100,000 American casualties by avoiding unnecessary assaults on fortified positions. It accelerated the Allied advance by months. It forced Japan to defend everywhere while attacking nowhere. That's how strategy actually changes in war. Not through one brilliant officer having a revelation late at night, but through collective analysis by military professionals weighing costs against benefits. The greatest victory isn't always won through battle. Sometimes the smartest move is refusing to fight. Rabaul stood undefeated for 18 months, 110,000 Japanese soldiers in the most fortified position in the Pacific. They were conquered not by invasion, but by strategic irrelevance. Sometimes the best way to win is to make your enemy's greatest strength completely meaningless. If you found this story as mind-bending as we did, drop a like. It helps us share more forgotten strategies that changed history. And tell me in the comments, what's another unwinnable battle where not fighting was the right call? From military history to everyday life, sometimes the smartest move is walking away. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.